Magandang umaga po mga kaibigan. Welcome to another edition of our TAPATAN sa Aristocrat. I hope everyone's all right. I hope everything's okay. And I'm happy to have with us our resource persons and our colleagues from the media joining us today. Marami pong mapapag-usapan. May kinalaman po ito sa ating po namang mga simbahan, mga cultural sites, at ang pagpapanatili ng mga ito, ganun din ang 500 years of Christianity. We have with us Ms. Tina Paterno, the president of ICOMOS Philippines, and architect Maria Rajilin Busmente, a heritage and conservation advocate. We're expecting Father Milan Ted Toralba, the executive secretary of the Commission on Cultural Heritage of the Church ng Catholic Bishops Conference of the Philippines, and we will be joined later by Dr. Eric Zerudo, ang pangulo po naman ng isang grupo sa UST Graduate School. Marami po tayong mga kasama sa media na naririto na magtatanong din sa ating mga panauhin. So let's begin by the opening statements of our resource persons. Kasama po natin si Madam Tina Paterno. Siya po ang Pangulo ng ICOMOS Philippines. Tina, good morning and welcome to the program. Please tell us more about ICOMOS Philippines. What have you been doing lately?
Well, ICOMOS Philippines is an international NGO, and perhaps its most famous hat is as consultant to UNESCO on matters of heritage. We are in about 153 countries to date, and we have our national committee. So what have we been doing here? Aside from online talks, we've also been doing research to establish baseline data on heritage, because right now there is none. So we don't quite know where. We need a situationer of where the heritage practice is.
Okay, that's just for the opening. Sandali lang po. Kasama natin si Architect Busmente. Marge, good morning and welcome to the discussions. Tell us more about your views on the state of our heritage, our culture. How are things going?
Magandang umaga po, Kuya Melo, at sa ating mga kasama. Ako yung nanggagaling sa isang perspective ng practitioner ng heritage. Pero tama din si Ms. Tina Paterno na ang ating pinanggagalingan sa heritage medyo hindi natin, walang kaklaruhan ba? Parang hindi siya ganun kaklaro kasi parang imbis na after nung case sana nung pambansang photobomber, dapat medyo magkaroon na tayo ng, should I say, reaction towards the spirit of the law, of the heritage law. Pero parang ganun pa rin. Marami pa rin akong nababalitaan na mga heritage na hindi, or pamana natin na hindi pa rin nasa-save. So, siguro ito napakaganda ng topic ngayong araw na to para mai-educate or masabi pa sa karamihan ang tungkol sa pagsalba ng ating pamana.
Okay. Sa ganitong pagkakataon, siguro I have to ask Tina, ano ba yung mga tinatadhana ng batas for us to recognize a place as a heritage or cultural site that we should preserve?
Well, we have built a national cultural registry. So that's a list of all places with different designations. And it lives on the National Committee of Culture and Arts, the NCCA website. This is called the PRECUP, Philippine Registry of Cultural Properties. And it comprises a list that were designated by the National Museum, the NHCP, and some from local governments nominating sites on the local level and bringing it up to that list. They have different qualities.
Mm-hmm. And for the information of our colleagues from the media, siguro I just have to be clear about this. We also invited the City Government of Manila, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts to join us today. However, hindi ko malaman kung saan nakarating yung sulat na pinadala ko sa kanila, and they have not responded. But you know, there are agencies in government who are probably too tied up to respond or probably they just don't want to take part in discussions. But anyway, dito sa Pilipinas, maraming cultural sites. I've seen it in churches. Nagkaroon ng problema sa Bohol, Lumindol, nagkaroon ng restoration. Ano po ba ang relasyon na sa pagkakaalam ninyo ng simbahan at ng pamahalaan who takes care of the restoration of areas or places which are said to have rich cultural heritage? Siguro I'll have to ask Tina about this from an international perspective.
Well, that's always, even internationally, an ongoing conversation. Because on the one hand, it's private property, but it's also cultural patrimony. So I guess the main question there is, whose job is it to preserve and protect? Should it solely be borne by the person who owns the site? Or should it be solely the government? And where is the line between someone saying, but I want the site that I own to have this kind of look because I'm tired of the old one? And where is the job of the government to say, wait, this is cultural heritage, it's not possible?
Okay. I've heard this, I've seen this. There are, well, fuera de los buenos, may mga paring Katoliko na nagsasabi na ako nakadistino rito sa parokya, so I have a say on what will happen in my parish because I'll be responsible to my bishop. From your end, have you heard such arguments, Tina?
All the time. And it's one of those things where that's the parish priest's job, and his constituents are the parish pastoral council. If, for example, I was part of that council and part of the parish, and I wanted to see a change, and I made a donation to fix it, typically in cases like that, it would be done according to my preferences because I'm the donor. So it's hard also to expect the parish priest to say no, because for them, a church is about people. It's less about the structure. So it's almost like asking a doctor, for example, whose job it is to care for the health and well-being of his patients, to care about the maintenance of his hospital, about the air conditioning ducts that are leaking.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my thoughts.
Yes. Marge, from your end, anong tingin mo rito? Karaniwan ba yung ganung problema?
Actually po, ang totoo niyan, by canon law, ang parish priest has the final say. Kaya wala ding magawa ang mga heritage advocates. Pero meron po tayong, in the year 2003, if I stand corrected, meron po tayong RP Vatican Agreement na for the protection ng ating mga cultural heritage. Because 70% of our cultural heritage is owned by the Roman Catholic Church. Ganon ka dami ang listings, no? At saka yung ating pre-cap, it is mandated by the National Heritage Act of 2009 to be completed in 3 years' time. Pero imposible to dahil napakadaming cultural mapping na gagawin mo, 1,600 numbers of municipalities. I stand corrected again, hindi ko alam ang tamang bilang. Pero yun po, napakaraming cultural heritage. Tapos yung RP Vatican Agreement, meron pa pong agreement yon with the CBCP and the NCCA, ang ating supposedly Ministro ng Kultura. Pero nung I think about 5 years ago, kinailangan ng i-renew ang 10-year agreement na yon. Hindi ko lang po sigurado kung ito ay na-renew. So, kasi nga hindi naman alam ng ibang mga kaparian na pagka sila ay na-assign sa isang parokya, tapos ito ay considered na napaka-importanting cultural property, sometimes binabago nila yung retablo just because kasi luma na. Hindi nila alam na importante pala yung lumang yon.
Mm-hmm.
Yan po.
Okay. All right. I recall having covered the CBCP beat for some time. Meron nga agreement yung Vatican at ang pamahalaan tungkol dito sa cultural heritage sites. I just don't know what difference there is in the Philippines from that of other countries because katulad sa Paris, sa Roma, hindi ka pwede magtayo ng high-rise sa mga lugar na merong, well, I should say, cultural value. I don't know, kailangan pa ba ng batas para maiwasan yung mga ganong pagkakataon, Tina?
Well, there are zoning laws here. There are height restrictions. I think the difference is they're not always followed. There's always room for a special case. And so someone is able to build in the middle of a historic district. In other countries, make no mistake, they still have to fight the same battles. I was talking to the tourism person from Prague, and he says on a daily basis, in the heart of Prague, we still get requests to build 50-story hotel right in the middle of the historic district. And they keep just having to say no on a daily basis. I guess on our end, we aren't as strict about enforcement.
Or probably we tend to, favor those requesting for construction of such high-rise buildings, no?
There's that too. I imagine that also helps the local government in terms of taxes. So, yeah. So that's a hard issue.
We're not saying it's not only taxes that matter, no?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Some people will say there may be some livelihood factors in it. No? Livelihood in the sense that people will be working in such structures, kailangan din nilang kumita, mga ganon. No? Pero pag-uusapan natin yan siguro doon sa national land use policy na kailangan natin. Marge, have you heard of a land use policy in the Philippines?
Actually, marami tayong land use policies in terms of the comprehensive land use programs. All local governments are mandated to create their CLUPs. However, I'm not sure kung Manila itself has approved any CLUP. Kasi parang hindi na-approvean ang kanilang CLUP. I think merong pinropose ang office ni Architect Palafox. Pero hindi yata ginagamit ito. So kung walang approved na CLUP, anong susundan na zoning and guidelines pagkadating sa any matter? Diba? O any land use. So hindi ko po sure, pero I think mas masasagot ito ng ating local government.
Yeah. Very controversial yan. Siguro probably we will have the DILG one of these days. We'd like to welcome Father Milan Ted Torralba, the Executive Secretary of the Commission on Cultural Heritage of the Church. Father Ted, good morning and welcome aboard. We'd like to hear your opening statements about the church. Yes. Yes, Father. Good morning.
Good morning. I think the Tapatan, no, the Aristocrat, like to thank the host, no, Mr. Melo Acuna, for inviting me to this event, no, and I think it's all about. I think you asked me to talk something about the cultural heritage and the 500-year Christianity, 500 years of Christianity in the country.
Yes,
and I would simply like to say that we are in the midst of preparation for this event, and I think the preparation ran for 9 years. This is the 10th year, supposedly the celebration, the celebratory phase, but because of the current pandemic and the quarantine condition, this is extended for next year in the hope that we will no longer be online but in person.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the hope that we have, and I think that would be made possible with the probably arrival of the vaccine that we are all waiting.
Yes. Father, samantalang nabanggit niyo yung preparation, ano po yung klase ng paghahanda ng Catholic Church para sa 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines? Have you made an inventory of areas where they are considered of rich cultural heritage value to the church and to the country?
Actually, it's a two domains. No, we would say the national and also the local. The national would pertain to the entire church in the Philippines. That means to say that the preparation will involve the entire church hierarchy, the entire church here in the country, but also local, meaning to say that each diocese has its own preparation and has its own celebration for the 500th year anniversary. So this is being prepared under the aegis of an executive committee in the CBCP, the YOC 500 Executive Committee, that is making all the plans, the preparations, and also the mode of celebrating the anniversary.
Yeah. Father, natanong ko kanina si Tina Paterno ng Ecommerce Philippines tungkol doon sa relasyon ng simbahan at ng pamahalaan sapagkat katulad nung nangyaring lindol sa Bohol, merong mga restoration na naganap. Pero meron ding mga nagsasabi na mga pare na ako yung in charge sa parokya, so ako yung masusunod. Ano ba ang relasyon ngayon? How do we handle such conditions?
There is an agreement. No? It is an international agreement between the Holy See and the Republic of the Philippines, governing the relationship between these two sovereign entities as regards the pastoral care, the conservation of the cultural materials, no, of the Catholic Church in the Philippines. And this international agreement was signed in 2007 and entered into force in 2008, but the agreement needed to be articulated. So there is a national agreement between the government and the church, between the CBCP and the NCCA and its related agencies. And we are at the tail end of the IRR. Tina would know this. We are at the tail end of the IRR of this agreement in order to flesh out the stipulations that are found in the agreement. So in terms of relationship between the church and the state, we are hoping that this would, the agreement would be a way of reducing tension, a way of putting the relationship into a more established form. No? There would be more rapport. No? People would be able to understand the scope of their competence, no? Because the conservation of heritage pertains to the mixed competence of not only the church but also of the government, no? As in the case of the earthquake that happened in my home province of Bohol. So things can be resolved. When we look at all the relationships that we have, we can resolve it by means of a dialogue, by means of, as we said, rapport, and by means of understanding what is at stake at the other side.
Yeah. Father Ted, full disclosure, we invited the city government of Manila, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, yeah, and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts to join us today. But they are not, I just haven't seen them check in. So it's okay. Siguro si Tina, I'd like to ask you, ano yung nilalamang mahalaga ng implementing rules and regulations, which the good Father Ted told us? Would you know?
Well, I guess in any nebulous relationship, the heart and the spirit of it is it sets terms for both sides to agree on. So once you have this set of rules, rules of conduct, it sets, as Father said, technical competencies. Before a restoration, you should do X, Y, and Z, so that they don't just rely on, say, the maintenance man. Can you fix this? Can you ask your friends to fix this? And once those rules are set and there's an understanding, then it should be smoother sailing from here on.
I see. What about expenses for the restoration of churches? Who takes care of it? Is it the government? Is it the Catholic Church? Father Ted? Father Ted?
Opo, in the case of in the case of Bohol, no, it's actually the government that funded the restoration, but at the same time, the diocese also raised funds, no, for the other aspects of the project, looking at the cultural materials as also pertaining to the patrimony of the nation. So
Mm.
you would see that the government really funded, no, funded the restoration project.
Yeah. I'm interested because,
Mega, may I say something?
oh, yes, please. Please.
In our research that we're doing currently with ECOMOS, we were looking at government spending. We're in the early part of our research, and the data that's emerging is in terms of number of sites, probably the most frequently funded site in terms of typology is the Catholic Church. So far, the data's turning up that 40% of funded sites are Roman Catholic churches. So yeah, to reiterate what Father Ted was saying, it is the government.
Uh, well, that's very good. But the question is, how much is it? Has it grown over the years? Have you noticed any increase or decrease depending on the president?
Sorry, you were breaking up.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. It's my
Government
PLDT.
spending.
It's my PLDT internet again. The question is, have you noticed any increase or decrease in the budget spent for Catholic churches restoration or repair or whatever?
Yes, definitely. It spiked when they were restoring after the earthquake, after the Bohol earthquake. There was a spike for the centennial. But yes, it's not always a flat line.
Mm. Okay. Anyway, we can check it with the Department of Budget and Management on how they release the funds. But this is a good thing that you mentioned. So 40%. Okay. Father, the Catholic Church will celebrate its 500 years. And I heard Archbishop Valles and Bishop David talk of pilgrim and jubilee churches. Now, let me ask you, are these pilgrim and jubilee churches part of the cultural heritage of the Catholic Church?
Well, I would say yes. No, most of the churches that are in the list as Jubilee churches are cultural heritage churches. No, most of them. But in some cases, as for instance, I'm going to speak for the Diocese of Tagbilaran, we made some choices for churches that are not heritage, no, not historic churches. And the reason for that is to highlight the out of the way, off the beaten track churches. No? Give them importance, no? Highlight an aspect, its unique selling point. No? Hindi lang yung palaging pinupuntahan. No? But also the churches that are not popular or popularized. So that answer would be yes, but the idea for Jubilee churches is really for them to become vessels of the granting of indulgences, which will come from the Holy See, no? Which would come from Rome. So we are waiting for the privilege, the decree that would come from in particular, the Apostolic Penitentiary. It's not a prison, but that's how it's termed, Apostolic Penitentiary, Penitentiaria Apostolica, and that is the office in the Holy See in the Vatican that grants privileges, no, such as indulgences.
I see. But there are also historical churches. I don't know how the Catholic Church looks at Barasuwain Church in Bulacan. Is it considered of cultural heritage?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It is declared as a national historical landmark and a national cultural treasure. it has historical significance because we know that in the late 19th century, that is the venue for the Malolos Congress and I think the writing of the Constitution. So it's very historically significant, aside from the fact that it's also, in a way, architecturally significant.
I see. What about other churches? Let's say in Cebu. Which would it be? Is it the Santo Niño or is it the cathedral?
Both would be not only historical but at the same time culturally significant. Santo Niño being the residence of the image, no? And the cathedral being the seat of the Archdiocese of Cebu.
I see. In some other areas, let's say, how would the church look at the cathedral in Marawi?
Well, it's a work in progress, and it's a cathedral. But when we say cathedral, it means to say that it is the mother church for a particular ecclesiastical jurisdiction or circumscription. So it has importance more than all the other churches. Importance in the sense of being the seat of the bishop or the prelate of that diocese.
I see. Once you say it's a basilica minore, what does it mean?
Well, a minor basilica is it's minor in contrast to the major basilicas. There are 7 major basilicas, and they are found only in Urbe, no? Meaning in Rome. And of the 7, the Holy Father, now the Emeritus Benedict XVI, decreed that there will be 4 patriarchal basilicas of the 7 major basilicas. So anything outside of the 7 are minor or is a minor basilica.
Yeah.
It is some kind of a recognition for a church because of antiquity, because of a significant object of devotion, no? Or because of historicity. And then the minor basilica is linked to a major basilica in Rome.
Yeah. Well, of course, you have the Maria Maggiore in Rome. You also have the
San Pietro.
Yeah, San Pietro, of course. And what about Saint Paul outside the walls?
Saint Paul outside the wall would be one of the patriarchal basilicas.
And the other one?
There is Saint Lawrence, and then there is Saint San Sebastian.
Oh, San Sebastian. We have a San Sebastian in Manila.
Not the San Sebastian of Ina.
Of Lima. Okay.
Of Ina, but San Sebastian of Rome.
I see. Okay, ano pong konsiderasyon, Tina and Marge, dun sa San Sebastian Church natin? Because it's said to be one of its kind in the Philippines. Puro bakal ito. Yes, Tina.
Sorry, Melo, what was the question?
How would you classify San Sebastian in Manila? Because it's said to be one of the most unique churches in the Philippines.
Yes, it's actually the only building in the country that's made of metal. It has the highest cultural designations as a national cultural treasure and a national historical landmark. And yes, it is very unique for its building material, also because it's probably, and Father Ted, let me know what your thoughts are on this. It's probably one of the last remaining churches in the Philippines whose interiors are still pretty much intact and original.
I see. How old is the original design of the interior? Father Ted, would you recall?
Well, if it's 1895, 1896, it's more than a century.
And it has survived wars, no? Yeah. Tina?
1891.
1891. Wow. That's something. Marge, yung architecture nito, how unique is this from the others?
Well, it's one of the few examples of neo-Gothic that has transported itself to the Philippines kasi during that time, Gothic architecture kasi began in 1100s, 12th century to about 16th century. Pero neo-Gothic na siya. So, nag-transport yung design na yon to the Philippines, making it one of the very best examples of which, in addition to the fact that unique yung building material niya because ilang beses na nasira ang mga naunang simbahan. So ibig sabihin, this was a resolution of many times over, pinag-isipan, pinag-aralan. And now it has stood in our skyline. It has been in our skyline for quite some time. So ang vista point from the start of the Hidalgo Street, the park, napakaganda, no? At
Plaza
saka
del
yung
Carmen, no? Plaza del
yes, the
Carmen.
Plaza del Carmen. So napakaganda ng vista points na naiwanan or nandyan pa rin ng ating simbahan na to. So that's why isa siya sa pinaka-iconic na masasabi mong parte ng siyudad ng Quiapo, Maynila, at yun na nga, na-mention na ni Miss Tina Paterno, isa siya sa pinaka-importanting istruktura ng buong bansa.
Okay.
Yun.
Mahalaga yun. Father Ted, let me ask you this. I've seen photos of St. Patrick's Cathedral sa Estados Unidos. I haven't been to yeah. I haven't been to the United States, but I saw photos of St. Patrick's Cathedral. At yung nasa likod niya, matataas na gusali. What difference will it make if cultural heritage churches will have the same background? Ano po kaya?
Well, I think Tina would would be able to answer that, no, having lived in New York for some time. But there has to be some historical reason for the buildings around St. Patrick. Kasi nga na yung kanyang visual corridor nawawala. But I can only guess that there were no legislations at that time, no, putting in place protection of the visual corridor for a monument such as structure such as the St. Patrick Cathedral. But I think Ma'am Tina.
Yeah. How
No.
important is the visual corridor, Tina?
Well, yeah, it highlights the building as an iconic capital, no? An iconic capital of a certain locality. No? When we look at it from the point of view of urban planning and then square it off with the laws of the Indies, we learn that certain buildings such as a church, because it is an iconic symbol, it has to be situated on a promontory, or it has to be situated in such a place that it can be seen visually in all its integrity. Nothing would obstruct it because it embodies the culture of the people. It embodies their hopes. It embodies their aspiration. So the aspiration, the hopes of the people would be translated into art form, in particular into architecture or into sculpture. So you give it a space so that with space you can really highlight the iconic capital or the iconic symbol.
Okay. Tina, yung sinasabi natin na magandang location ng simbahan, maging icon siya, how do you look at it? How important is it?
Well, I think in a perfect world, that vista would be preserved. The question, though, I mean, in reality, is who will pay for the preservation of that vista? If you're talking about you cannot build within a buffer zone of say 200 meters outside the church beyond 4 stories, and you were the owner of such a property, where is the space for whose rights get followed? No, it gets expensive then. To who pays for that? So those are the gray areas, and the way they deal with it in the States is, or at least in New York, is they have air transfer rights. because the cost is tremendous. And then they also would regulate it stylistically, to somehow meld with the historic character.
Okay. Well, I've seen some roads in Paris na hindi pwede magtayo ng gusali 5 stories. Kung gusto mo mag-high-rise, doon ka sa labas ng syudad. Pero hindi uubra sa Pilipinas yan sapagkat ako may-ari, I can do as I please. Like for example, in Quezon City, a residential area like Pag-asa, nagtataasa na yung mga gusali, may mga condominium na. Yung quiet residential area, nagiging business area na, no? So, babalik tayo dun sa land use policy, if there is such a thing as land use policy in the Philippines, because our concept of ownership is different from that of other countries. I don't know whether lawmakers will pass such laws, because we've heard there are lawmakers who are into this business. Father Ted, your reactions, please.
Eh, totoo po yung sinabi niyo. Well, I think that the land use zoning would be a key, to protecting the vista of the church, because with the land use zoning, one identifies the core zone, one identifies the buffer zone. And then once we have that, then legislations can be put in place, can be crafted. For instance, the easement would be defined, and then the height of the buildings would be determined. The X radius, from the core zone or from the buffer zone, under which some other items or some other objects or buildings can be constructed or won't be constructed. So it's really a matter of commitment to the ideals of looking at the structure or a monument as iconic for a particular people or particular culture.
Yeah. Before I open the floor to our colleagues from the media, let me ask you, there is this church in the Diocese of Legazpi. This is the Daraga Church, Our Lady of the Gate Parish. Yeah. And sa labas, you can see it's really old. Pero pagpasok mo, it's modern. Paano yun? Ano ang tingin ng inyong tanggapan, ng inyong komisyon, Father Ted?
There are many ways of looking at it. No, when you just conserve or preserve the structure, in particular, the facade, ang tawagan yan, facadism. Just the facade, and then the other members, the other construction members of the building would be preserved. But sometimes you could play with the interior. Halimbawa, things change right after the Second Vatican Council. No? You would notice during the time 65 and up, priests were removing reredos, they were removing retablos, and then they moved the altar. It used to be fixed, and then now they moved it to the center. They moved the tabernacle to the side. But these are within the perspective of liturgical law. They still follow liturgical law. Sometimes we have issues as to how do we look at beauty. What is transcendental beauty for us? That may be beautiful for that particular parish. It may not be beautiful for another parish. So it really is sometimes dependent on how priests would interpret the liturgical law that was crafted during the time or right after the Second Vatican Council.
Okay. Tina, your thoughts about the issue about preserving the facade pero bago yun nasa loob?
It's certainly not best practice, but when considered in the whole range of options, down to demolition, is it better than demolition? Yes. The other question to think about is, what was inside that was lost? I think a lot of some examples, it's easier to revert to facadism, because it gives you more freedom to create with the interior space, which is the one that's used. Um, but fast forward, if everyone did that, what would our grandchildren look back to as our heritage? What
Okay.
would be their understanding of it?
Yeah. Well, I've seen the Duomo from inside. I've seen St. Peter's Basilica. It's always been the same. Kung meron mang changes, very minor. Like, itinaas na yung labi ni Pope John Paul II doon sa ground floor rather than nandun sa basement. No? Pero basically, the structure is there. But the next question is, how safe are these cultural heritage churches considering their age? Will it not also endanger public safety in times of emergency? Father Ted?
Well, if we go by experience, no, in the case of my home diocese of Tagbilaran, where most of the churches were damaged by the October 2013 earthquake. With the earthquake, that was the time we came to learn that uh, the law of gravity was the only thing holding those churches. The law of gravity was the only thing holding those churches together, because
Mhm.
the mortars were already totally corrupted, dilapidated, no? Reduced. Most of them were no longer effective. No? So there was nothing that bind the stones, no, together,
Mhm.
no, and the mamposteria within them. So you were looking at a structure that was ready to fall. It was like it's like a person trying to push a wall using his bare finger,
Aha.
and then that was it. But with the 7.2 magnitude earthquake, that did the entire structure.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's how we came to learn about the event.
Okay. Well, how would you consider then San Agustin Church?
San Agustin Church, I think probably I can't really speak for San Agustin Church, but I think there were conservation, probably maintenance procedures made on the church from the moment it was constructed up to the time probably during the Second World War, and then it was rehabilitated, probably retrofitted after the war. So
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Father. We have questions from our colleagues from the media. Si Laila Pangilinan of News 5 is with us. Good morning, Laila, and welcome to the discussions. Your questions, please.
Good morning po. To anybody concerned, meron po ba tayong guidelines kung paano ipe-preserve yung mga heritage and cultural churches natin? For example po kasi tulad sa vegan, di ba? Meron silang mga guidelines. Hindi mo basta pwedeng galawin ang isang lumang bahay. Hindi mo siya agad pwedeng i-restore or gawing bago, not unless you follow these guidelines. Like, for example, dapat yung bubong ganito, dapat yung sahig ganito lang. Meron po ba tayong ganon ding klaseng parang guidelines on restoring our churches?
Yes, please. Father Ted, and then Tina and March.
well,
Father.
we have yes, opo, we have general principles to follow, no? And these general principles can be found in the different issuance from the Holy See. There are also general principles coming from the CBCP, and then each bishop would have their own norms, no, for the preservation of their churches, conservation of their ecclesiastical structures. And we also adopt other protocols or charters, standards coming from UNESCO, also coming from ICOMOS, insofar as these are applicable to the church, to the structure. So there really are a number of guidelines. No? These are legislative measures that would protect the integrity and authenticity of a heritage church.
Mm-hmm. Tina?
Thank you, Father.
Yeah, Tina.
Dito to what Father Ted said, no? Aside from there being regulations, the most recent one being the NCCA CBCP one that's forthcoming still, are the NHCP, the NCCA also have their own guidelines. So there are many, and maybe it's a matter of consolidating into one very loud guideline that will be distributed rather than many little ones, no? But yes, they exist.
Okay. Marge? Yes, Marge.
Yes, I remember the NCCA has the Balangkas, and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines had authored a guidelines on masonry restoration, and there is also the national NHCP guidelines on heritage zones. Also, the basic principles on wood is being used. I think the basic principles that is being used in wood are through the training systems that were gained by the technical people from the national agencies. And I think some of them trained in Norway and Japan. So yun yung mga ahead sa wood preservation na mga countries. And then yun, so far, that's what I know. Plus, vegan has its own, as you mentioned. Vegan has its very strict implementation rules and guidelines. And I think Architect Melba Haba also came out with a book on guidelines on how to conduct restoration. So those
Yeah.
are the materials that we have so far.
Okay. Very good. You know, we're also good at preservation eh. Yung mga sinaunang simbahan, katulad sa Albay, katulad sa Sorsogon, meron talagang, hindi ko malaman kung anong technique ang ginamit nila. Napipreserve talaga yon, no? Siguro we should also go down and find out from the locals ano yung experience nila. Yes, Laila, follow up?
Um, do we have a number on kung ilan po yung mga nire-restore natin to date?
Yes, please.
You mean the number of restored sites annually? Is that what you mean?
Hindi po. Meron po ba tayong bilang kung ilan yung ongoing pa yung restoration?
I think, can I think the budget for restoration was not included this infra year. So baka wala sila masyadong ma-restore this year kasi because of pandemic issues. And I think National Historical Commission was only allowed to restore parang 2. Yun lang yung may budget sila for this year.
Would you know kung
what is that, ma'am?
anong lugar yon? Marge?
I think one of them is Taal. I'm not very sure, but that's what was mentioned.
Okay. Father Ted?
St. Peter's.
Yeah,
St. Peter's.
only recently they restored the Paway, no? And then, as Architect Raj mentioned, Taal. But I would also like to mention there are 3 churches in my home diocese of Tagbilaran, Lobok, Loon, and Maribohok that are still undergoing actual restoration work. And the budget had been there previously. They are simply continuing with the project, and hopefully the restoration work would be completed this year. So that would be there would be something like 3 that churches that are still in the restoration mode. All the others have already been restored, as with the NHCP.
maihahabol naman po pala sa 500. Father, sorry po, medyo sesegue ko na rin po kasi malapit ng Lent. Meron po ba tayong idea na on how Ash Wednesday will be done for this year?
It's actually it's a practice that is the traditional way. No, it's sprinkling the ashes on the crown. Hindi
Mm.
hindi kasi dito yun eh.
Ah, okay.
It's not really here. It's not really here. It's
Okay.
really sprinkling the ash, the blessed ashes on the head, on the crown of the person. So that is how the imposition of ash is conducted. No? It's not making the sign of the cross
Okay.
here and there.
Yeah.
Well, it's difficult to repeat it, but that's how it is supposed to be done.
And that is what the Catholic Church will do this year.
Apa. Yes, and among us priests, we don't. If you would notice, we don't put the ash on our forehead. You can find us doing that.
Yeah.
What we do is to impose it on the other priest's crown.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That's the way to be done.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay po. Thank
Okay,
you.
Laila?
I have no more further questions. Salamat po.
Okay, salamat. Jerry Lirio. Jerry, you have some questions? Please go ahead.
Father, good morning po. Father, can you give us an
Oh.
overview of how we will celebrate the 500 years? What are how many old churches would be involved in the celebration?
I think it's not a question of how many old churches. All churches would be involved in the celebration. No one is exempted from the celebration. As I said, there are two areas or domains by which we highlight the celebration for the fifth centenary. That one would be the national, and the second would be the local. The local, I mean to say, I take to mean the diocesan celebrations. Each diocese will celebrate, and one way for doing that is to identify their jubilee or quincentennial churches. As I said, they would be the vessel, the venue for the granting of the privilege of indulgence. So all churches, all parish churches would be involved, regardless of whether they are old, whether they are historic, non-historic, whether they are modern or modernized.
Uuwi po ba si Cardinal Tagle for the
I
celebration?
I don't know, and I'm not privy to his schedule. No, probably or probably not. I have no idea.
Okay po. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Willard Cheng of ABS got some questions. Please go ahead. Willard?
Hi, Melo. Yes, good
Nice
morning
seeing
to
you.
our speakers.
Yes, please.
I have a question for Father Toralba. Can you just speak, Father, of the role that heritage churches will play in the celebration of 500 years? What sort of message would you like to convey to the faithful in terms of appreciation of heritage churches, especially for as we celebrate the 500th year of Christianity?
I would focus on the history, not so much the architectural, not so much on the social, not so much on the aesthetics of the church or its historicity. I would like to focus on the economy of the history of salvation. Meaning to say that these churches, they are the emblem of the route of God, the presence of God in the country. It's been 500 years, no? 500 years of Christianity. But we must also remember that from May 1 of 1521 until March of 1565, a span of 44 years, there was nothing there. There was no presence of the church, as it were, because when the Spaniards came with Magellan and Elcano with their expedition, their purpose was not evangelization. Their purpose was colonization. Their purpose was really to find the route to the Maluco for the spices. So when we consider in its entirety, we look at these churches as venues where God has touched the lives of people. In Latin, we would say the transitus Dei, the transit, the passing of God. So when God passes at a certain point in life, at a certain point in history, we see the concrete manifestation of His presence. And the monumental manifestation of that presence would be the churches. Monumental in the sense of the fact that it's an edifice, no? Whether it began as something that's small and then it grows organically, but we see the growth of faith, the growth of the people, the growth of the culture impacted by the coming of that faith, and the interplay of culture and faith that gives rise to what we now call cultural heritage. So when we look at the entire scheme of things, it is part of what we would say part of divine providence. That there is a certain definitive destiny, not only for the churches, but for the people that build those churches, for the people that is the real church. So, yun po ang masasabi ko.
Thank you, Father Toralba. Thank you, Melo.
Thank you po. Thank you po.
Father
Thank you
Ted, let me ask you, may nagsasabi, I just couldn't recall who among the African leaders said, when the Europeans came, they had the cross, we had our lands. And later on, the Europeans had our lands and we had the cross. Is that colonization daw po talaga yung ginawa? Pero dito sa atin, how are you to separate that from the spread of the Christian faith among Filipinos? Paano natin mapapaghiwalay yun?
Well,
Please.
As I mentioned, the purpose for Magellan's coming was really to find the route for the spices, no? And they, of course, in those days, as it is now, they have a fleet chaplain, no? A fleet chaplain, and that's in the person of Father Pedro Valderrama, no? Who was the chaplain of that Magellan expedition. But he was chaplain only for the fleet, only for the fleet, not only for the mariners, the seamen who were with Magellan. It was not their intention to evangelize because there was only one priest. And then second, there was no, because they had no plan, there was really no idea of preaching to the people because then you would think about how do you sustain this evangelistic enterprise, no? When our original plan, the mandate from the Spanish monarch was to just find that route to the Moluccas. So it's a totally different purpose when Legazpi came and all the other expeditions that came between Magellan and Legazpi, because then there was already the intent to find not only routes but lands for the Spanish crown, or to claim them for the Spanish monarch. So
Yeah.
there was really different purpose.
Okay. Well, somebody just said, when a family came, we had our land. And later on, they had the village. But that's another topic we will discuss in the near future. Let's look forward. Anong pwede nating asahan sa mga susunod na panahon? How are we to preserve our cultural heritage through these structures? Coming from an architect na advocate sa preservation, Marge, for your message sa ating panayam ngayong araw na ito.
Actually, I'd like to send out the message to the developers that heritage is also a very good tool in development. So sana they would also look into developing old structures. And maybe if facadism, yes, is considered as one of the last resort. Kumbaga, parang last mo na siya pwedeng gawin sa heritage because you change a lot of the components. However, if similar to France and other European countries, they have converted most of their heritage into a development tool. So I'm hoping that in the future, the economy movers, which are basically the developers, would also look into doing something like this. Sana hindi yung parang to tear it down, to change it, but more of to preserve and to be involved also in continuing the spirit of the past for the future generations.
Yeah. Marge, I don't know about the open spaces, the need for open spaces. Without necessarily saying the Italians have a way of doing it, but I've seen open spaces at the heart of the city. Napasyalan ko yon. Sabi ko, mabuti wala pa nagtatayo ng mall dito. Wala pa nagtatayo ng condo.
I think yes, that's also a good thing now because I think also there is an awakening with regard to preserving open spaces. There's also that understanding that open spaces should be preserved nowadays. Meron na siyang premium, hindi katulad nung araw lahat na lang ng space tinatayuan. So meron na ang consciousness ng ating economic movers. Meron na silang consciousness regarding the prime effect of open spaces. So, yun.
Are you hopeful the government will be able to do something significant within its final days?
I am always hopeful. I am always hopeful. I would like to keep that in a continuing effort kasi there is always a chance.
Okay. Thank you. Tina, from
Thank you, Kuya Melo.
Yeah, thank you. Tina, how do you look at the future?
How do we look at the future? Well, building on what Raj has said, we're glad for this premium on open spaces. You had asked earlier about the IRR between the CBCP and the NCCA, and it started off with a definition of terms, and one of those was to the understanding of a heritage, not just, it doesn't only include your church, but also the surrounding spaces and the setting, the sort of the negative spaces, the courtyards, that are part and parcel of heritage. So there's a shift in understanding between just the building and preserving the entire setting. As far as being hopeful, I think there are several initiatives, but I think there's a lot of possibility that is currently not happening in the local government. The LGUs recognizing what their heritage is and promoting initiatives to preserve them. I mean, look at vegan. That wasn't a national initiative. That was a very local one. So in terms of what can happen on the local level, I'm optimistic because there's a lot of room there.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may leave with one last statement, it was just a rejoinder to what Father Ted was saying, his description of the churches in Bohol, the state they were in when the earthquake happened. In answer to your question, how safe are heritage structures? My answer there is not all heritage structures are inherently unsafe. It's a matter of maintenance. And if those churches in Bohol had been maintained frequently, imagine what the outcome might have been. It might have been a different story. And another thing I hear is that preservation is expensive. Well, it's only expensive if you let it progress to the point that the entire structure needs an overhaul. If you maintain, the cheapest form of restoration is maintenance. So if you do it frequently, then it shouldn't be a hazard, a health hazard.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Father Ted, halina po kayo. Final statements na tayo. Yeah.
Sorry.
So, looking forward, ano ang nakikita nyo? Anong pwedeng gawin ng Catholic faithful, ng mga mamamayan, ng LGUs, ng national government? Tell us, anong message ninyo?
It's more of continuing awareness raising, continuing sensitivity heightening, no, of cultural heritage. Hindi lang sa simbahan, not only of the church but also of the nation. And that is important because, as we have always been saying, cultural heritage really embodies the aspiration, the hope of a certain group of people, no? A certain population, no? Certain nation. So when we preserve them, we sustain their integrity, their authenticity. We promote them, but at the same time, using cultural heritage, we want to evolve. We don't want cultural heritage fossilized. We don't want cultural heritage be placed in a museum. We don't want them to become museal objects or artifacts, but we want cultural heritage as bedrock for an evolutionary leap towards making new heritage. So that is the future that we are looking at, meaning to say, at this moment, utilizing the present cultural heritage that we received from the past, we evolve them, allow them to evolve with the people's present aspiration, telling them what do we want to see 40 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. So that object, that cultural material would be 50 or 100 years from now would be heritage. And people 50, 100 years from now would be looking back. Look at what our past generation did for us.
Okay. Napakaganda po ng mensahe ninyo, Father Ted, ganun din kay Tina at kay Marge.
Oh.
I'd like to thank everyone who took time out to be with us today on this important topic, churches, cultural sites, preservation, and 500 years of Christianity. Iba yung conservation, preservation sa conversation. Kung puro conversation tayo, wala tayong patutunguhan. We should preserve our cultural heritage, not political dynasties. Yun lang ang nakikita natin. Itong pamilyang ito, nandyan na nung araw pa, hanggang ngayon, nandyan pa. So, yun yata na preserve natin in the Philippines. Pero in so doing, nakakalimutan yung mahalagang bagay na sasalamin sa atin. Ano yung ating nakalipas upang malaman natin kung anong ating patutunguhan. Thank you very much for taking time out. Si Dr. Eric Cerudo begged off, hindi yata makaalis doon sa kanyang meeting. Thank you, Father Ted Turalba, Ms. Tina Paterno, and Architect Marge Busmente, and our colleagues from the media. Till next time, God bless us all. Please take care. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.